All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to be sharing with you some of the new workshop materials that we just released in early February of this year. My name is Michael Brigham, and I'm the digital community lead here at HELP, part of the knowledge translation team. And I'm joined as well by Sally McBride, who's the manager of our knowledge translation team, and Merritt Gilbert, who works in our MDI implementation team. You probably have received many emails from her if you are a participant in the data collection process here for the MDI. But we have a couple special guests that we also want to introduce you to quickly because they're going to be sharing a lot of their expertise this webinar hour. We are joined by Tracy Smyth and Tammy Dewar. They are from Ready to Raise, and they are incredible community engagement leads and consultants, and we have really benefited from their expertise throughout the whole process of building Discover MDI. But in particular, over the past few months, they joined us to help create these new workshop resources that we're sharing today that we hope will help you start a conversation about well-being using MDI data. So thank you guys for joining.
Thank you.
So one thing that we like to think about is that MDI data is sort of a snapshot. It's filled out by students in grade 4 or grade 7 in your community once a year. And although it presents an accurate picture, it's a bit two-dimensional. And so what we're really excited about doing is allowing you to use the workshop materials we've developed to take this single picture of something that's real in your community and figure out how it is integrated to the real 3D world around it. So we really want to help you make sense of MDI data in the real world. So these workshop materials that we developed can be found on Discover MDI right now. We have 2 complete workshops that we've created for you. The first, which we'll talk about in a minute, is about exploring data, and the second is about channeling ideas and building action teams. So each of these workshops includes a facilitator guide that walks you through the process, as well as printable resources for all the participants in the workshop. And we also created companion slide decks. So if you are the type of person that likes to present with digital slides, we've already created those for you. There's also an action planning workbook that we developed, which allows you and your participants to take the ideas that come up in workshop 1 and 2 and really start turning them into actionable pieces, creating those first steps for you to carry the progress forward. So rather than me talking about this, we're actually going to let the creators of these materials, Tammy and Tracy, talk to you a little bit about how it's structured and how they built it. So I'm going to hand this over to you guys right now. By the way, if you want to find these to follow along, you're welcome to. They're at discovermdi.ca/workshops.
Awesome. So let's start by just giving a bit of an overview about the materials, what exists and how it fits together and why. So backing up a little bit, overall the intent for this process or project was to develop a set of inquiry type resources that could be used both by schools and in communities. So when you get your local MDI data, you can actually use it and start moving towards action. Now, because this was a concept that Dr. Kim Schoenet-Reichel had envisioned from the very early days of developing the MDI, we really wanted to fulfill her vision of a strength-based inquiry type approach, but that was really loaded with tools and resources. So there are many, many ways, I just have to say this up front, that to approach a change and to do a change process. This is really just one way that attempts to satisfy a whole lot of different variables that we're hoping to achieve. Things like we wanted this one process to be really strong, yet anybody could do. This isn't about developing a cookie cutter approach. And also it's about nudging people to think about change in different ways, to influence a wider system, to, if you're from a school, to build bridges with the community or vice versa. Certainly nudging to include kids in terms of hearing more voices, as well as idea development and action as well. So ultimately, this is a process that we want people to feel very comfortable doing, but also has all these elements baked right in that push communities and schools towards the things that we are learning make a difference. A strength-based approach that's really accessible, powerful, and productive, yet, like I said, simple for anyone to use. Now, there were, of course, a few specific challenges and variables that we tried to pay attention to in the development, and that's kind of how it turned out the way it did. The first one is time. So there was a number of focus groups as well as a pilot that helped us discover that time was an important thing to pay attention to, because some people have like an hour here or there to kind of pay attention to MDI results and look at the data, work with their teams. Other people can have the luxury of a whole day or a series of days and everything in between. And we wanted this one process to be able to be adaptable for any of those situations. The other variable is audience. We know, even from the list of people who registered from this webinar and people that we've talked to, MDI users are incredibly varied. We have classroom teachers, we have school teams, we have school administrators, multi-agency community groups, other community developer type people, and we want all of those people to see themselves in this process and feel that they could lead it themselves. And the final variable there is experience, both experience with the MDI itself, as well as facilitating a group. And with the latter one, we hope this, again, is very easy, step by step, and yet still very effective for everyone. One of the things, I mentioned the focus groups, one of the things that we learn from these focus groups is that some people don't do anything with their data because they're waiting to feel like they're an MDI expert. But using this process, kind of a roadmap of how to go forward, you don't need to be an expert. You just need to start. And you need to be part of a making meaning process, which moves from that data into conversation and eventually into action.
Great. Let's talk a little bit more about that roadmap and get to some of the details about what materials and tools exist and how they help take you through that making change journey and help you reach certain outcomes. Michael, you started to share some of that, so we'll just go into it a little bit more here. So workshop 1 is all about exploring data. And inside that, so we're picturing you right now, whether you're at home, in your office, in a classroom, wherever you are, if you are going online, what meets you, what's there for you, is there are 6 main activities included in this workshop 1. And these activities get to certain outcomes. And we hope that these outcomes will resonate with you as being important ones. This workshop is intended to help you take that MDI data and build a personal connection to the data. So it is about like what intrigues you, what resonates, what interests you. And so certainly those activities will help you connect to it in a personal, but then later in a collective way as well. Another activity will help you uncover and identify key strengths and challenges, as well as those curiosities. What are the questions that come up as you're exploring this data together? And it helps to consider, there's activities to help you consider different perspectives and make meaning from looking at things from different lenses. In addition, there is time to really reveal what actions are already happening and how do you build on them and begin to think of new possibilities, particularly when looking and talking about skills and assets. So that's workshop 1, and then heading into workshop 2, you can imagine a lot of exploration and making meaning. What comes next is you want to go from that talk and that exploration into action and developing those ideas and taking them further together. So you're going to find, if you go into those materials, 6 main activities within workshop 2 that will help you get to action. And again, let's run through those outcomes and why you might want to do this in your community or in your school. Well, you want to do it if you want action, if you want to form action teams. If you feel that brainstorming and generating ideas is something that your community or school or group could really benefit from. So not only do we generate ideas and brainstorm, we then want to help whittle it down to really doable priorities and sorting through and finding and making decisions about what will have the biggest impact. And then remembering we're not alone. We're not alone in moving action forward, and that it is about identifying and developing relationships to support the action. So we actually have a great relationship mapping activity in there to help you do that. And finally, this action workbook that Michael has mentioned, where you take sort of top ideas and priorities that you've identified and you flesh them out. You really get clear about what they look like. So inside each of those activities that we've mentioned, there's more. There are agendas and there's those activity instructions, but there's also extra tools, links and videos and PowerPoint decks and worksheets, all kinds of tools for you to use. And one of the key pieces is the facilitator's guide, which you'll see here. Each of the 2 workshops has these guides embedded right into it. And the key thing, I guess, that we want people to think about with any of these materials is to make them your own, to adapt them, to extend them so that they really fit for you, to feel welcome to go longer or shorter with the times that we've suggested, and to really just make sure it fits your facilitation style and matches your group's needs.
Yeah, we've bundled these together into 2 workshops that we think really combine the 2 halves of the experience that are both, about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. But it's certainly possible to break the activities into separate pieces that you can do with different groups on different days. So please don't feel like you need to just follow it to the letter. As Tammy said, really it's about taking the ideas that are in there and the instructions, piloting 1 or 2 of them out, and just seeing it as part of a process that you can change and develop over time. So, one of the great things is that we've actually been able to test this out. And I thought that while we have Tammy and Tracy here, they could share a little bit about their experience piloting it. So you guys held this workshop in Port Alberni last year. This was a collection of people who work in the school system as well as the community, and we got a chance to really learn what these workshop materials can do in person and how people can really make use of them to build community change. So can you guys talk a little bit about what that was like?
Absolutely. It was super fun, and it was a huge learning experience for everybody. The pilot that we did was really focused on just on workshop 1. For the pilot, we worked with a senior school district administrator who was willing to be a little bit vulnerable as we were, practicing this out and testing to see how it would work. His district has been very engaged at a school and district level with MDI data, but hadn't yet taken that leap to work with community partners in a really intentional way. And because workshop 1 is focused on exploring the data, it really fit for those purposes. So they designated a half day and invited a variety of people, mostly at a senior decision-making level. For many of the participants, to be honest, it was their very first introduction to the MDI, but for others, it was a chance to dig into the research together a little deeper and with some new perspectives around the table. They followed the materials for workshop 1, so he used the facilitator guide pretty much to the letter. In these photos, they're doing an activity exploring the data. The MDI data is broken up into data stations on the wall so that people can examine all 5 dimensions of well-being. So they worked in small groups to do this at first, and then they came back to a larger group to share. Part of that exploration was really digging deeper to discover what are the strengths that they learned from the MDI reports, the challenges that surfaced, and really exciting was the curiosities, because always data helps you ask some really great new questions and better questions, and so those were captured as well. Another part of the process from workshop 1 are wisdom circles. Now, these are intended to bring people into a guided dialogue in a way that isn't about analyzing the data. It's not about problem solving. It's not about advocating for, what you should do or we should do. It's about learning together. It's about exploring different perspectives and co-creating a shared meaning. Funnily enough, the administrator who facilitated this confessed later that he almost skipped this activity because he wasn't really sure what he was going to get out of it, but was really glad he didn't skip it. It was incredibly rich, and this list here of the ahas doesn't even begin to capture the depth that the conversations went in the room. And then at the end of the workshop, there's an activity called Opening the Door to Opportunity. Now, this group shared specific ideas about opportunities they saw for the future, both as individuals, as organizations, and as a community. It really got us to a sense of collective commitment, which was exciting. And we should and will credit the administrator for coming up with this open door metaphor for the activity. And people really resonated with that. It was kind of like, yeah, we're getting together in this meeting, the door's open, the future, we have a role to co-create together. After the pilot, we asked everyone involved for some feedback and reflections on their experiences. The administrator who did the facilitating, he highlighted the fact that it helped him overcome a significant barrier that he was facing. Kind of long, but these are his words. The challenge we faced was how to connect various authorities, agencies, and organizations in a multi-stakeholder process where there was no singular lead authority, agency, or organization. Well, this multi-stakeholder process had been on the to-do list for a number of years. The uncertainty of how to bring people together without becoming that de facto lead agency meant that it never got off the to-do list. This particular district has been doing the MDI for many years. And always the intention of working broader, but this came to a head as to, like, we really need to, this process can help us do that.
And can you just let us know, like, what types of sectors or organizations were represented in this room?
Sure, there was government, municipal government, so there was city councilor, there was RCMP, there were community school, health, other education folks, social work, Aboriginal organizations. It was a really wonderful cross-section of people. And again, some people came in the door, that was the first time they ever saw the MDI data, and other people had been working in their own particular, I'll say silos, but this was a way to start to cross-pollinate and have those conversations together. Kind of as a side note, like, this is about like the barrier that prevented him from moving forward all those years. In the pilot, there were, before the pilot, we did all those focus groups, and a lot of barriers came up. They're really real barriers of what people were experiencing that prevented them from doing anything with the MDI. Some of them, like, it's going to take too much time. I'm not a facilitator. I don't know how to do this. The data is overwhelming because it's so deep and it's so rich. I don't even know where to start. That one I mentioned before about feeling that need to be an MDI expert. So as you're listening to this, do any of those resonate? Has any of these kind of come up to that you can identify has stopped your process from going forward? So that last one in particular, the administrator felt it was about, like, he didn't want it all to be on his shoulders. So afterwards we asked him, okay, so you did this, now what? And he said, the resources helped me clarify intentions and outcomes for the meeting, ease my concerns about assuming that de facto lead agency role, and provided facilitation strategies and processes that ensured everyone's understanding and engagement. So that felt really validating to hear that he felt he could take it as is, and those barriers kind of became much more reduced. So the participants shared what was the benefits for them as well, that the session was engaging, inspiring, and motivating, which was really awesome. As well, a whole bunch of them said it was a great opportunity to share knowledge and explore issues, and all of them said it generated a stronger sense of community partnership potential, which is really excellent. And I think I have one more quote from the administrator. I could have hired an external facilitator, but I believe the fact that I assumed a lead facilitator role both elevated the importance of the topic and increased participants' commitment to the agenda, which really says something in terms of communities moving forward together.
I think the word facilitator here is really important. One of the things that I remark upon after seeing the pilot is that it really turns our normal way of presenting MDI data on its head. Like, oftentimes it's a school district administrator who takes the report, reads it, and then makes a presentation to an audience. It's very unidirectional, and it does make that person who's doing the presenting feel like they need to be an expert and that they're passing this knowledge on to a receptive audience. And these materials, and especially the wisdom circle format, kind of democratizes the conversation a bit, that people can ask their own questions, they can have their personal reactions to the data, and that it can really be sort of a shared conversation and exploration throughout the process. And so even though you do need to have one or two facilitators who are keeping things moving, it's not as if they are doing all the talking.
Right.
And I think that can really make for a richer experience and identify questions that you want to follow up on and relationships that you want to build. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about your experience both with the MDI and in community engagement generally, because you have a lot of expertise here. And so I wanted to be able to transition into a bit of a Q&A period now. And for audience members out there, if you have any questions that you'd like us to address to Tammy and Tracy, please go ahead and fill them in the question box, and then we can address them after a couple of minutes. So let's begin. So the first question that I have for you is about the relationship with data. And so you've talked a lot already about how sometimes people feel like they need to be an expert, and that's intimidating. Sometimes they feel overwhelmed by the amount of MDI data or other data sets that they're looking at. Alternatively, sometimes people just eat it up and they want to take it and put it in a spreadsheet and then send it out in a report, or they want to immediately look for a place to solve a problem. And although we value a diversity of approaches to data, I thought you guys could maybe share your perspective on what you see as sort of an ideal relationship that people can have with the data and how they can use it.
Yes, would love to. And I mean, I was nodding my head as you said all of those reactions, because it's like I think we can all identify with having a variety of reactions to data. All of the above is what I would have said to that. And the relationship with data that we envisioned was one that makes room to explore all of those reactions, to actually make space for them. So if there are fears, if there are blocks, if there are any concerns, but also to make space for the excitement and for the celebrations and the questions and curiosities and everything that comes with it. This process we're hoping will cover and make space for all of that to be able to be in the room together and to be real about it. And so it is an intentional process with that in mind, and to really hopefully make it so it feels like it's about learning together and not necessarily having to solve everything or figure everything out. It's about exploring together. And it is less about, like what you were saying, Michael, it is less about presenting data, and it's more about that digesting data together and experiencing it more deeply and using it to inspire action. So actually using it. In particular, for the MDI, it's about using the data to make change in schools, of course, or communities to support children's well-being. And that was really the relationship we kept coming back to and kept in mind.
And, in different situations, we know that there are definitely distinct stages of a relationship with data as well that groups go through. Some are easier and less messy, but to be honest, mostly they're not as easy and more messy. But it's a journey, so to speak. It's just this journey of exploring as well as making meaning, developing ideas, and then getting to that action. And that's kind of what we tried to do in this making change process, and match concrete tools to help go through those processes. The quote here we like on the screen here is the goal really is to turn data into information and information into insight. And, and we would add turn insight into a plan to grow. And when you explore data in a process, you bring people together to engage with this information and ask, like in this case, everybody, what does well-being look like in our community or in our school?
Nice. So if we keep on and think of that as a journey, the next part of the journey along the path would be about making meaning. And one of, I think, our favorite parts when people get into the room and do some of these types of activities is that it ends up being about the stories. It's about those lived experiences and the shared knowledge that's in the room. And that is, like this quote says, that data really can be summaries of thousands of stories. And just entering into those conversations and starting to tell a few of them helps to really bring, again, that personal connection and insights with one another together.
And then that final stage, which we hope people get to, is the action part. And it's about having that relationship with data and then getting to creating a plan, getting to action by identifying a focus and all the strategies and relationships that are going to make a difference. And as this particular quote says, it takes courage. It really does, to put ideas out there and then to actually make them happen. The activities in the latter part of the process, so that would be like in workshop 2, are really intended to inspire, but also scaffold and frame action. And you mentioned about presentations and that sharing information. There is times for sure for data to be presented. And then there are other times when you need to make that space to start the conversation, to make change. Thankfully, HELP has resources to do all of the above. There's fantastic presentation material and support and ideas, as well as now there are some great materials on Discover MDI website for people who want to do it less traditional, less of a one-way sharing, and more extending that conversation and beginning, hard change work.
So we want to make sure that anyone can be a facilitator and use these materials, but I know that some are sort of born cheerleaders and presenters, and others might be a bit more introverted or just don't have as much experience doing this type of consultation and group engagement. And because you guys have so much experience, I'm wondering if you could share a few tips that you have for really building not only meaningful, but also sort of energetic, engaging, lightweight experiences.
Would love to, and we have a whole bunch of tips. Are you ready? We're going to throw them at you. All kinds. And to be honest, I think Tracy and I have identified ourselves as introverts as well at different times.
Totally.
And so just to know, like, that really can fit still with taking on one of these roles. So one of the first tips that we'd like to share that we find really important is this idea of co-facilitation type of idea, that find backup, foster partnerships from the start, and enlist a colleague. Find someone to be a co-host, and it's just really a great way to share the leadership and set the stage for collaborative action right from the get-go. So these are things you can do even before you get started. Another idea that we do every single time you think about people coming together is, how do you design your meeting space for that really rich interaction and engagement, as you've said, Michael. And we like to walk into a space and go, what's the energy in here? What's happening in here? How can we increase the energy? How can we move things? What's the lighting like? What's the heating like? And just take all of those little things. They might seem little, but they actually make such a difference in helping to keep people feel welcome and to feel engaged over time. Another tip is personalizing your invitation and giving info ahead of time. If we can give another shout out to the administrator in the pilot, one of the ways that he put out a personal invite is he thought about every single person who was on that list. He printed out the data for them, as well as some other resources, put it all together into a binder, and personally delivered them. And not only that, there was a welcome, like, please come type of letter, but then he also took stickies and put them in certain areas of, I've heard this might matter to you before, or this might be an area that intrigues you from the data. And it was this personal type of connection and invitation that was great.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating if you're attending one of these events and you have to spend the first 15 minutes trying to figure out sort of why you're there,
yes,
what's expected of you, and just having that personal touch and knowing how you can participate from the very beginning really sets the stage well.
Sure does.
It does. That clear purpose. Yeah. What is this all about? So thinking about that and getting that out ahead of time. And finally, for yourself is to think about, yes, so go over and read over all the different agendas and facilitator guides and PowerPoints if you're using them. You can do it without the PowerPoints, but for you to also think about, how are you going to adapt it? How does that really fit for you? If you are one of the people co-hosting or co-leading it, how can you make sure the materials really fit for what you feel comfortable presenting? So feeling welcome to edit things and changing them up. And include your own personal stories and examples when possible. So that's sort of getting ready. That's the before. And then if we think about tips for actually when you're in it. So there you go, you're prepared, you're like, I've got this full of intent, this is going to run well. And then there's things to think about as we're in that making change process as well. So setting the stage and the tone. So that might be greeting people as they arrive. Today, we actually had Sally have on some lovely jazz music. We had a session here today of making change, and there was this music that greeted people as they walked in. And again, that really did set a relaxed tone. There was a lot of easy conversation happening. It almost matched the rhythm of the music. So taking time to think about that and setting the stage. Another tip is just reading the energy and adjusting as necessary. If I could use another example from today of when we did get together to sort of try out some of the making change activities, was recognizing that after lunch can be a really natural dip in energy. So anticipating that, think about the time of day that you're holding your making change sessions, and think about what you can do to support raising the energy. Sometimes those walk breaks, or as today was invited, go outside, have lunch outside, take a little walk around. And using visual cues to stay on track. So yes, there are those PowerPoint slides that can certainly help guide the process, but you can also facilitate this making change process with no technology. If you do go low tech, you may still want to think about those visual cues, though, not only for yourself, it helps yourself stay on track if you are leading it, but it's also helpful to people participating. How many times have you facilitated something and then people say, what was that we're doing? What's happening there? So it just helps to sometimes put up the question you might be posing, or put up some of the activity instructions on a whiteboard or on a flip chart paper or whatever you might have. And then just a couple quick tips just to wrap that up is to think about, so after, following up after, what can you do to keep the momentum going? And one of the, just sharing summaries, making sure that they come out to keep things fresh in people's minds, to remind them about all of their voices and everything that was shared, and providing any follow-up links or materials or those next step ideas. And finally, just keep learning, keep harvesting those ideas, invite that feedback, and learn more about what's resonating with people. I don't know about you, but again, that introvert thing, being walking out of a room and the next day the ideas coming or the thoughts coming, percolating and thinking on it. So just making sure there's a way for that information to still plug back in and be able to be shared.
We had, as Tracy mentioned earlier, we had an in-person session today, and one of the pieces of feedback that we received is that people were really seeing this not just as workshop 1, do that, workshop 2, process is over, but really looking at it over a longer time frame. So one example was putting MDI data up in a staff room or a publicly accessible space, so that over the course of a week or even a month, people could take a look at it and start digesting it. So they didn't feel like they needed to do it, you know, right here, right in this space, and one time only kind of a deal. Or alternatively, wanting to have different conversations with different audiences. So maybe you have a workshop that's focused primarily on families. Maybe you have a workshop that is actually really kid-friendly, and you bring students in to like learn a little bit about what others in their community had said through the MDI. So I think there's a lot of benefit in taking your time and making it, as we said all along, making it work for you and your motivations here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing the information that you've gleaned through not only the development of these workshop materials, but your own experience actually working with communities and helping them do this type of guided facilitation. Mm-hmm. So I really encourage everyone to, again, take a look at Ready to Raise. That is the readytoraise.org.
.community.
Readytoraise.community. We can share the link with everyone after following this webinar, where you can learn more about the work that Tracy and Tammy are doing outside of HELP. But right now, I just wanted to do a quick check-in and see if anyone from the audience had questions that we could pose to Tammy and Tracy while they're here. In the meantime, while we see if any people have questions that they want to raise, I wanted to just make sure that everyone knew how to find these materials on the Discover MDI website. So the first thing to look at is discovermdi.ca/workshops. That post here includes an introduction to all the materials that we've been talking about today. It sort of breaks down the different steps in each of the workshops. And then we have a direct link to those resources here. So Workshop 1, Exploring Data, and Workshop 2, these are the facilitator guides, and they include all of the activities. They're bundled as one single PDF. The Action Planning Workbook, which is an activity that you can do at the end of Workshop 2, or even following, as a way to really visualize the ideas that you've developed and sort of start turning them just from a single idea into an actual plan. That resource is here for you. And then underneath here, we have the slide decks that are companions to each of the workshop materials. So please feel free to go ahead, download these, slice and dice them, and make use of them. We really, really encourage that. The other two things that I wanted to highlight for everyone on the webinar today, here's our homepage here. If you scroll to the bottom, and at the bottom of every page now, we've got 3 buttons here. We really want to make sure that if you're doing work in the community, if you're doing this workshop, if you're sharing your data, if you have questions about anything, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear how you're making use of the materials we shared today or any of the other resources that are available here on the Discover MDI Field Guide. If you click this button, it'll take you directly to a contact page, and we will get your question, your idea, your story, and we'd love to have it. And then the final place I wanted to highlight again is that we have 10 MDI champions who are people who are seasoned in this type of work in both schools and communities. We want to make sure that you know that not only can you read their stories by clicking on their profiles here, but more importantly, you can ask them a question directly. So maybe it doesn't make sense to send the question to help since we're a research organization. If you actually want to know what Marna has done with MDI in her community or how she's made a presentation, you can ask her that question right here. So just wanted to make sure if you weren't already familiar, these are opportunities that you have to connect directly with people who are doing MDI across British Columbia. And so I'm just going to return to the PowerPoint presentation now. And it looks like we have a question. So we've been asked, is there any training to run through these resources prior to a community facilitating a session? So the first thing that I would encourage you to do is take a look through the material, because those facilitator guides really offer step-by-step instructions on each of the activities. We have suggestions on how much time it would take to do it, as well as tips in the sidebar that might help ease your mind. You know, ideas, what to do if the session's running long, or how you might want to switch it up depending on the size of the group. But I'd also say that you are welcome then to get in touch with us through those contact forms that I identified on the field guide before. So if you're planning a presentation in your community, you're going to be talking to a group of parents, for example, and you are a little bit, you know, just shaky on the details or want a little bit of a pep talk, please do get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to share whatever advice we have.
I'll just share some feedback that I received today. A woman said, you know, when I first looked at the resources, I was a little nervous. I thought, oh, you really need to have some facilitation experience, but she didn't really look at them really closely. And then today, she was like, okay, I looked at them closely, and you have written them in a way, and with the amazing you know, resources from help and the knowledge translation and the images and how it's all packaged together, it's really step by step and clear, and it's accessible. So she was really pleased that, you know, you didn't need training to be able to do this at all. So that was really good feedback.
And what we would definitely recommend is maybe just picking one of the activities from one of the workshops and starting there. Set the bar really low for yourself. Do it with a group of people you already know if you want to just sort of test the waters a bit. It really doesn't need to be done as one whole giant engagement session.
Start with the very first one, which is really a shallow dive into interacting with the data and having personal connections and sharing with others. It's kind of a more thorough kind of icebreaker, but it's much more than an icebreaker, but it's really easy to do, and it really creates a lot of energy, and that's kind of the first step. So that would be a nice way to start.
And if you do go out and use these materials and then send us the feedback that you have either received from participants or that you've been thinking about as you're leading the workshop, that would really help us. Then we can find out what type of additional training resources might be needed by finding out sort of where the pain points are or where people want to go a little bit deeper.
Pain points. There will be no pain points.
So it doesn't look like we have any other questions today, but if you do, again, you know where to find us. Please do get in touch through those buttons on the Discover MDI website and let us know if you have any other questions about these materials, about engagement more generally, and we're happy even to pass on questions to Tammy and Tracy if you have specific ones for them as well. So just a couple of notes about things that are going to be coming up. First, on May 15th, circa May 15th, we will be releasing the this year's school district and community report. So these are our public reports that compile the data at the school district and community level and also provide maps on different neighborhoods. So it's really a great resource for educators and anyone in the community alike. Those will be available on the help website at earlylearning.ubc.ca around May 15th. And we invite you not only to download them, read them yourselves, but also to share them. So you are welcome to take this and then share it with people who are on your city council, or share it with a PAC, or share it with your physician. Really just any people who you think in the community ought to know about data on childhood well-being are ones that should take a look at this report. So please feel free to download and share to your heart's delight. The next event coming up is our webinar in May. That'll be on the 23rd. It's at the same time, 3:30 p.m. Pacific. That's data is meant to be shared. And so that's really walking you through the process once you have the report in hand, how to go about presenting it to other groups. And we'll have at least one, probably two special guests who can share a little bit about how they've been able to take that report and then share it with groups to start this whole process of data sharing. And the final event that we want to highlight for now is a webinar in June. So this will be the final webinar for this year's cycle of our MDI Trainer Network. It's on June 12th, and it's going to focus explicitly on well-being after school. So we have a couple of components there that I think you'll be interested in. First, our director, Kim Schonert-Reichel, is part of a project called ELMOS. It's the Lower Mainland Out of School Time project. And so we're going to be taking a look at compiled out of school time data for all of the Lower Mainland over time and taking a look at trends and hotspots. And we're also going to be joined by at least one special guest from Surrey, who's going to talk a little bit about how they use after-school data collected from the MDI in their resource planning to prepare for how the city can roll out additional after-school supports for all the kids in their community. So please take a look. You can find these on the Discover MDI website under events and training here, and we'll probably be sharing it over our social media. Maybe even you'll be getting an email from us in our newsletter too. So please go ahead and look there for upcoming events. And finally, we just really want to thank you all for joining. We work so hard, our teams here, to collect data in partnership with you during the school year, and this is sort of the second half of our work, which is to really make sure that it doesn't just sit in a report, but it actually gets out and it's incorporated into conversations and community meetings so that we can all continue our big goal, which is making sure that kids in the middle years have the type of thriving environments that can really support them. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you're listening to this recording in the future, thank you for doing so then. And please take a look at our workshop materials and go forth and make something good. Do you guys want to say anything before we sign off?
Just want to thank you for having us, and it's we have been help groupies forever, and it is such a pleasure to continue to advance working with community, making those bridges, and the work that you guys do is amazing. So thank you so much, and thank you, Michael.
Thanks. All right, thank you everyone, and we will see you on May 23rd for our next webinar. Take care.